Good evening and welcome to this work session. There was one item. On our work session this evening, and that's an update of negotiation process. Karen and Scott.
All right, good evening. As co-chairs of the city's negotiation team, we're here to provide an update on the negotiation process and also get some guidance regarding technical requirement in the contract. As of today's date, we have met with all union groups at least twice. At this point, all proposals have been presented and they're on the table. The tone in general has been positive. We feel that we're making good progress. And it is our expectation that we'll have a tentative proposed contract to you before the contract's termination on June 30th. The technical requirement that I mentioned, each of our contracts has an evergreen clause, which means that unless we give notice of the contract's termination or modification, they'll self-renew for annual periods. The deadline to give that notice is March 1st, tomorrow. So that's the guidance we're here to see if the city wants to send this notice. This is something that we've typically done in the past. This isn't a new requirement. Again, it's a technical requirement. We're hoping to have, again, tentative agreements in place, but this preserves the right to terminate the agreement if we do not come to an agreement by June 30th.
Anybody any questions on that part?
Yeah, what's the upside and the downside?
Yeah, if it's terminated, what is that? If there's no contract in place and that's terminated, where do we stand at that point?
If there's no contract, it doesn't mean we don't recognize the unions. It doesn't mean we decertify or anything like that. It simply means there's no current contract. There's several different options. The city can implement our last best final offer. We can decide to start negotiating from scratch. We can say, okay, we don't recognize the old contract. We want a completely new contract. A lot of times the reality of having a deadline will almost prompt movement, and it helps both sides. So if there, an impending deadline can help both sides come to an agreement with an impending deadline.
How would that affect service levels at any point? If there's not a contract, somebody's terminated, would there be any disruption of service?
No, there should not be.
Okay.
There should not be, or there will not be.
There's no strike ability. None of them can strike, so they would still continue as far as the service would go.
Right, city personnel policy could cover everyone, or if we choose to implement our last best final, that could be implemented as well.
And what bargaining units are we dealing with right now?
All of them.
All of them. So we have our largest group, which is ASME 1540, the general labor, which spans across many of our city departments. We have our other ASME group, 3373, which is specific to sworn police, IFF, which represents sworn fire, and IBEW is our smallest, but there are electrical workers.
So really, but what we would really like to do is have contracts in hand prior to trying to finalize a budget of some sort, because you can't possibly finalize a budget if you don't know what your contracts say.
Let me ask you this. I'm under the impression that all these contracts have Me Too clauses.
No,
Just one.
Which one?
1540 is the only one with a Me Too clause on it.
And if we don't give them notice of termination of the contract, that Me Too clause stays in effect, correct? I would suggest we give termination notice. We already know where we're at with firefighters, right? We're not discussing money at all with firefighters, right? Because we already have an agreement.
Well, with the
I don't think they can answer that publicly. That would be the impression from this side of the table.
Well,
This is my
let's
problem
say,
with having this in open session, is because you can't answer questions, and I don't know how I'm supposed to give direction if I've never been involved in these conversations before. So I don't know how I'm supposed to provide direction on something that I'm just being told, no offense to you guys, not that I don't trust your judgment, but everything seems to be going okay. Well, what does that really mean? What's going okay? And I understand that you can't answer those questions here, which is why I didn't want to do this like this, because I don't feel like I'm in a place with enough knowledge to provide direction.
is there an objection if, well, I'll move into executive session.
I second that.
And I will note also, which I said to Emily earlier today, and I've said to others, one of the problems we've had with the executive session issue is when there's a motion made to go into executive session, because we've scheduled an executive session, when we have the discussion about whether we should go into executive session or not, we're already de facto in executive session.
Well,
The
then that
public-
determination needs to be made before we go to that.
No, but
meeting.
the public never hears our discussion about whether we should go into executive session or not. And I think we need to take care of that problem, because every time that we have an executive session scheduled, there's nobody there for the public because they know it's a closed session, and then we have a great debate about whether we should discuss things in executive session, and the public is cut off from hearing that discussion, and so
It didn't used to be that way.
No,
that
it
is
didn't.
correct.
It used to be that we did that on this floor
At 4 o'clock.
at 4 o'clock in public session, and that was changed during the last administration, where we started to have those meetings up on the 4th floor, and there was no availability of public review in this room or on camera, frankly, to bear witness to that discussion.
And one of the reasons I agreed with Paul and Kristen not to do this in executive session was for that very reason. That if we were gonna go into executive session, that we had to have the discussion about executive session in public. And then if we decide to go into executive session, we will, but if we won't, if we do, the people will know why we do it, and if we don't do it, the people will know why we don't do it.
And if I'm understanding the negotiation agreement properly, either side can't speak about certain things publicly. So it's not like, I mean, everyone throws around, we need to be transparent, and I get that, but if there are things we
I
can't
don't think
discuss
we're throwing
publicly, we
around
can't
transparency.
discuss things publicly. So I just,
Which gets into another question of, what was the authority to come to an agreement for this administration that negotiations would never be discussed in public? We've certainly never voted on that. And to say that 3 years ago, that was a ground rule and it's never even been discussed for this negotiation, it still remains a ground rule, to me is problematic. I mean, it seems like we don't have anything to say about this. That we're being told you can't discuss it in public because somewhere along the line, somebody agreed to a ground rule that there wouldn't be public discussions. And so I agree with Emily. We need to either discuss this thing in public, or we need to go into executive session so people can make intelligent decisions about what should be done. In the same respect, if we're gonna stay in public session, I would still ask the question to staff, what is the advantage versus the disadvantage? But
There is a motion and a second to go in executive session, and that needs to be dealt with. Is there any further discussion about the
Yep.
motion and the second?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, because as I think I've said to this body, to the last body, to the public, you know, and I don't say this to staff or the council this evening, I say it to the citizens, I am adamantly opposed to any further discussions or negotiations associated with our union bargaining groups in closed session. You know, we talk about these ground rules that we're supposed to have, and I have yet in my tenure here to witness all of those ground rules on both sides being kept consistently to. And, you know, if the last set of negotiations were anything, they were a reflection of that. You identify 4 different discussions with 4 different groups to have 4 different outcomes, and no sooner are those outcomes solidified, completely out of the purview of the very citizens that you know we have the responsibility to negotiate on behalf of, and you know, no sooner are those completed than you know, one group says, well, what do you mean you did this for this group? You weren't supposed to do that for that group. You know, you said you weren't doing it for that group. And that's an argument. That's an argument that was made. It was certainly not done in any degree of confidence, and so that gets aggrieved, and it cost us, you know, $150,000. You have a second argument that's made. And then another group says, well, you know, we can't believe that you gave in to those grievances of this other group. And we didn't give in to it. You know, we argued that process. And so that group says, well, if you know, if you subjected yourself to the grievance of this group and a second grievance from this group, you know, we're going to aggrieve that. And I got to tell you, every instance where we have went into closed session to have those discussions and come to those decisions, only to watch afterward that they're largely undone, that it largely occurs in a fairly public manner, and makes sort of this side of the table appear to be incompetent in that process, knowing full well that that's not the case, is not, in my opinion, a responsible way to handle this business on behalf of the citizens. And I have no interest in going to closed session for any further discussions on unions, and I will tell you very frankly, I will not participate. I will not sit in the closed meetings where these discussions are had.
Anybody else?
Yes, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can't have those conversations in public, right? Like, everything he's talking about, we can't have them in public, right? So, I mean, we could.
Everything's negotiable.
That's very
What we
debatable.
will not do, because I signed ground rules
Sure.
with 2 of the unions. Karen signed them with the other 2 unions. And that is discussed in an open session, in public, in this room, in any other room where there is public around, in the newspaper, TV, anything. We will not discuss what we talk about behind closed doors with any of the union negotiating teams.
Right.
That bottom line. We
And this
won't do
body needs to revisit those ground rules.
Right. Who made the determination on those ground rules to begin with? Is that from the previous administration?
those ground rules that have been part of negotiations. This is our second time around, and they were part of them long before that, to try to keep the negotiations between the 2 parties and not done in the media.
Right.
And I can tell you, from my standpoint, and I can speak for Karen on this, that was not done 3 years ago by either of us, and it's not gonna be done as long as we're the ones that are representing the city at the table. We will not take the negotiations outside of that closed room.
Any further discussion?
Well, I think with all due respect, it'll be, as far as the revisiting of the ground rules, if the rules change, the rules change. I mean, I understand your position there, but if something changes, then that's what happens.
But they have to be private now, so.
A public directive from the body of council to say whether or not we're not going to have ground rules, or what the ground rules are going to be, or whether or not negotiations will be in public. Staff has come to the prior administration and to this administration in former executive sessions to look for guidance on whether or not we should continue to negotiate in good faith. That being said, it was never said, there was a few comments made from a few council folks who said they would prefer to have open discussions, but the body of council never gave that directive to staff. Staff needs to proceed in good faith. Ground rules were established, and of course that's part of the ground rules, because we were not given a directive that all negotiations would be in public.
I don't think that question was ever asked.
I mean, that's where we are.
And I think that as it applies to this motion to go into closed session specific to those negotiations, I think for me, there is some degree of separation between the two. I'm not asking at all that the negotiations that you have with those bargaining units directly are of a public process. What I'm saying is I don't have any interest in reviewing those items in our communication in that closed setting.
Privately, right.
I guess my point is I'm not comfortable giving direction on something that I only have high-level information about, but you guys are the expert in it, so I will let you decide your motion on my behalf. I'm not comfortable giving direction on something where I don't really know.
Okay, we still have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion on the motion to go in executive session? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Aye.
Can I see a show of hands, all in favor? Do a hand count. 1, 2, 3, opposed? 1, 2, motion carries. We're in executive session now. Thank you. We have to clear the council.